The microphone's screech didn't just ring through the black marble rafters of the ballroom. It felt like a physical blade sliding across my throat. I was standing in the dim light near the service doors, my hands folded over a cheap, off-the-rack dress, trying to blend into the wallpaper as my sister Vivien took center stage. She looked like a queen in her ivory rehearsal gown, but her eyes, cold and sharp as industrial diamonds, were locked on me. "Before we begin," she announced, her voice amplified and dripping with a cruel performative sweetness, "make sure my sister sits in the very back row. She's just here for the photos, and we don't want to ruin the aesthetic for the people who actually belong here." The room didn't just go quiet. It curdled. Then, like a dam breaking, the laughter started. High society bridesmaids in pastel silk covered their mouths with manicured hands, whispering behind their fans, while my own parents looked down at their champagne flutes, refusing to meet my eyes. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, that familiar, suffocating shame that had been my only companion for 24 years. I wanted to run, to let the shadows swallow me whole, but then a hand settled on my shoulder, heavy, warm, and pulsing with a power that made the air in the room suddenly feel thin. The laughter died instantly as Julian Voss, a man whose net worth could buy the entire city twice over, stepped out of the dark and looked directly into my sister's soul. "Tell them who you really are, Clare," he commanded. His voice a low, dangerous rumble that shook the crystal chandeliers. "Tell them, or I will. Before we start, drop a comment below. Tell us your city, your story, and when this video ends, share what you would do in this moment. We read every word." In the house of Voss Miller, Vivien was the masterpiece and I was the smudge on the canvas. Growing up, I was the insurance policy, the sister who existed to donate a kidney if the golden child ever needed one, but otherwise I was meant to stay silent and out of the way. My parents poured every cent of our family's modest wealth into Vivien's pageants, her designer wardrobe, and her elite education. When it was my turn for college, the well was dry. "You're practical, Clare," my father had said without looking up from his paper. "You'll find a way." I did find a way. But I didn't find it in the light. While Vivien was busy cultivating an Instagram life and hunting for a husband with a trust fund, I moved into a basement apartment and lived on caffeine and spite. I worked 3 jobs while teaching myself the brutal, high-stakes world of corporate acquisitions and distressed assets. I learned that in business, being invisible is actually a superpower. No one sees the mouse until it's already eating the cheese. By the time I turned 23, I had built a shell company that specialized in buying the debt of failing luxury brands. That was how I met Julian. We were both circling a dying tech firm like sharks. Instead of fighting me, he saw the lethal precision of my strategy. We became silent partners. He provided the public face of Voss Industries, and I provided the capital and the algorithms from the shadows. Together we were unstoppable. But my greatest project wasn't a tech firm. It was Aurelia, the global hospitality empire that owned the very ballroom we were standing in. Vivien had spent years worshipping the Aurelia brand, treating their venues like holy ground. She didn't know that 6 months ago, I had quietly bought a 75% stake in the entire company. I owned the chair she was sitting on and the champagne she was using to toast her own vanity. I only agreed to be in her wedding because my mother had begged me, claiming it was for family unity. But standing there, hearing the room mock me at Vivien's command, I realized there was no family left to save. "Julian, what are you doing here?" Vivien stammered, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. She tried to force a laugh, her hand trembling as she gripped the podium. "This is a private rehearsal. My sister is just... she's sensitive. I was only joking." "The joke is over," Julian said, his voice cutting through her excuse like a scalpel. He didn't look at her. He looked at the crowd. "You've all spent the last hour laughing at a woman who could have you evicted from this building with a single phone call." A collective gasp rippled through the pews. My mother stood up, her face pale. "Clare, what is he talking about?" I stepped forward, leaving the shadows for the first time in my life. The click of my heels on the marble floor sounded like a countdown. I didn't look at my parents. I looked at Vivien, who was clutching her ivory gown so hard I thought the silk might tear. You wanted me in the back, Viv, I said, my voice steady and cold. Because you think wealth is something you inherit or marry into. You think power is about whose name is on the guest list. But I've spent the last 5 years learning that real power is knowing whose name is on the deed. You're delusional, Vivien hissed, though her eyes were darting frantically toward her fiancé, Ethan, who looked like he was about to faint. You're a clerk at a shipping firm. You have nothing. Julian pulled a slim leather folder from his jacket and tossed it onto the head table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of my father. Check the ownership papers for the Aurelia Group, Mr. Miller. Look at the majority shareholder's name. It's not a shipping firm. It's a holding company owned entirely by your invisible daughter. My father's hands shook as he opened the folder. The silence in the room was absolute, so heavy it felt like the walls were closing in. He looked at the document, then at me, then back at the paper. Claire. You bought this. All of this. I bought the venue, the catering, and the contract for the wedding tomorrow, I said. I turned back to Vivien, whose expression had shifted from shock to a terrifying raw rage. And since I own the venue, I've decided to make a management decision. This event is cancelled. Effective immediately. Vivien let out a scream that sounded more like an animal than a human. She lunged for a wine glass and smashed it against the table, red wine splattering across her dress like a bloodstain. You can't do this. This is my night. I am the star. You're nobody. Ethan, her fiancé, grabbed her arm. His face twisted in disgust. Vivien, stop. Look at yourself. You've been bullying her all week. And she owns the place. I didn't even know you were capable of being this cruel. She's a liar. Vivien shrieked, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She's trying to steal my life. I don't want your life, Vivien, I said, feeling a strange, hollow peace wash over me. I spent 20 years wanting your life. But then I realized I could just build my own. You're not a queen. You're just a tenant in a building I own. And your lease is up. I turned and walked toward the exit. Julian fell into step beside me, his presence a silent shield. As we passed the pews, the people who had been laughing moments ago now shrunk away, unable to meet my gaze. My parents called out my name, their voices desperate and full of a sudden hollow affection, but I didn't turn back. You don't look back at a house that's already burned down. Outside, the night air was sharp and sweet. For the first time in 24 years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a shadow. Why did you do it? I asked Julian as we reached the curb. You could have let me handle it. Julian leaned against the car, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. I knew you could handle it, Claire. But a fire is always brighter when someone else holds the match. You've spent long enough in the dark. I looked back at the grand hall, where the lights were flickering off and the guests were scurrying out like rats from a sinking ship. The sister who didn't belong was the only one with a home to go to. If this story reminded you that your value isn't defined by the people who try to keep you small, subscribe to the channel. We tell stories for the ones who were told they didn't belong, because sometimes the person in the back is the one who owns the whole building. Don't miss our next story of ultimate revenge and redemption.